American Civil War. The American Civil War began on April 12, 1861, when the Confederate Army attacked the American military base at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. In response to the attack on April 15th, Lincoln ordered the states to send forces totaling 75,000 to retake the forts, defend the capital, and preserve the Union, which in his view remained intact despite the actions of the seceding states. The two armies had their first major clashes at the First Battle of Bull Run, which ended in a surprise Union defeat. Importantly, however, the battle showed both the Union and the Confederacy that the war would be longer and bloodier than originally anticipated. The war was soon divided into two theaters, the Eastern and the Western. In the Western theater, the Union was quite successful, with major battles such as Perryville and Shiloh, which resulted in strategic Union victories and the destruction of major Confederate campaigns. The Eastern Theater began poorly for the Union with a Confederate victory at Manassas Junction, Bull Run, just outside Washington. Major General George B. McClellan was given command of all Union Army units. After reorganizing the new Army of the Potomac, McClellan failed to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, in the Peninsula Campaign, and retreated after being attacked by newly appointed Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Feeling confident in his army after defeating the Union at the Second Battle of Bull Run, Lee embarked on an invasion of the North, but was stopped by McClellan at the bloody Battle of Antietam. McClellan, however, was relieved of his command for refusing to pursue Lee's remnants. His successor, General Ambrose Burnside, suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Fredericksburg in late 1862, prompting yet another change of command. Lee won again at Chancellorsville in May 1863, but lost his top aide, Stonewall Jackson. But Lee pressed hard and disregarded the Union threat in the West. Lee invaded Pennsylvania to find supplies and inflict attrition on the North. Perhaps the turning point of the war came when Lee's army was decisively defeated at the Battle of Gettysburg on July 1st to 3rd, 1863. Meanwhile, on July 4th, 1863, Union forces under General Ulysses S. Grant gained control of the Mississippi River at the Battle of Vicksburg, thus splitting the Confederacy in two. Lincoln made General Grant commander of all Union Army units. The final 2 years of the war were bloody for both sides, with General Grant waging a war of attrition against General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. This war of attrition was divided into three major campaigns. The first was the Overland Campaign, which forced Lee to retreat to Petersburg, where Grant launched his second major assault in the Richmond-Petersburg Campaign, besieging Petersburg. After a siege of nearly 10 months, Petersburg surrendered. However, the defenders of Fort Gregg allowed Lee to withdraw his army from Petersburg. Grant followed suit and launched his final campaign, the Appomattox Campaign, which resulted in Lee ordering the Army of Northern Virginia to surrender on April 9, 1865, at the Appomattox County Courthouse. Other Confederate armies followed suit, and the war ended without a post-war insurgency. According to the 1860 U.S. Census, approximately 8% of all white males aged 13 to 43 died in the war, including 6% in the North and 18% in the South, making the Civil War the deadliest war in U.S. history. Its legacy includes the end of slavery in the United States, the restoration of the Union, and the strengthening of the central government. Reconstruction and the Age of Greece. The era of Reconstruction spanned from Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, to the Compromise of 1877. The major issues facing Lincoln were the status of former slaves, called freedmen, the loyalty and civil rights of former rebel soldiers, the status of the 11 former Confederate states, the power of the federal government needed to prevent a future civil war, and the question of whether Congress or the President would make major decisions. The serious threats of starvation and displacement of unemployed former slaves were addressed through the first major federal relief agency, the Freedmen's Bureau, operated by the U.S. Army. 3 Reconstruction Amendments were passed to extend civil rights to Black Americans. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery, The 14th Amendment guaranteed equality for all and citizenship for blacks. And the 15th Amendment prohibited the disenfranchisement of a person on account of race. Although former rebels still held most of the southern states for more than 2 years, that changed when radical Republicans effectively took control of the United States Congress in the elections of 1866. President Andrew Johnson, who sought to ease the process of reunification with the former rebels, was effectively powerless. He himself escaped impeachment by a single vote. Congress granted blacks the right to vote and stripped many former Confederate officials of their right to hold public office. The Republican governments came to power in alliance with freedmen, former slaves, carpetbaggers, newcomers to the South from the North, and scalawags, native Southern whites who supported Reconstruction. They were supported by the U.S. Army. Opponents said these groups were corrupt and violated white rights. The new Republican Confederacy later lost power state by state to the conservative Democratic coalition, which eventually took control of the entire South in 1877. In response to the radical Reconstruction, the Ku Klux Klan was formed in 1867. It was a white supremacist organization that opposed Republican rule and civil rights for blacks. President Ulysses Grant vigorously enforced the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1870 to suppress the group. As a result, the group was disbanded. However, other paramilitary groups such as the White League and the Red Shirts attempted to regain political power for whites in states across the South in the 1870s. Reconstruction ended after the disputed election of 1876 between Republican Rutherford B. Hayes and Democrat Samuel J. Tilden. After a compromise, Hayes won the presidency. The federal government withdrew troops from the South, and the Southern Democratic Party re-entered the national political arena. After 1890, Southern states completely disenfranchised black voters. Blacks were segregated in public places and remained second-class citizens in a system known as Jim Crow, until the civil rights movement gained momentum in 1964 to 65. The second half of the 19th century was marked by the growth and settlement of the American West. First by horse-drawn wagons, and then aided by the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad and frequent wars with Native Americans as settlers encroached on Native American traditional lands. Gradually, the United States purchased their lands and erased their claims, forcing most tribes onto limited reservations. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 1894, the wars between Native Americans and the U.S. government totaled more than 40. They claimed the lives of about 19,000 white women and children and about 30,000 Native Americans. The galvanization era was a term used by Mark Twain to describe a period in the late 19th century when American wealth and prosperity increased dramatically. Reforms of the era included the Civil Service Act, which required applicants for government jobs to compete on merit. Other important laws included the Interstate Commerce Act, which ended railroad discrimination against small shipping companies, and the Sherman Antitrust Act, which prohibited monopolies in commerce. Mark Twain believed that the era was corrupted by elements such as land speculators, corrupt politics, and unscrupulous business practices. By 1890, American industrial output and per capita income far exceeded those of any other nation in the world. To cope with mounting debt and lower agricultural prices, cotton and wheat farmers joined the People's Party. The sudden influx of immigrants from Europe helped both provide labor for American industry and create multiracial communities in previously undeveloped areas. Between 1880 and 1914, the peak years of immigration, over 22 million people immigrated to the United States, 92. Workers' demands for control over their workplaces led to frequent riots in cities and mining camps. Industrial leaders included John D. Rockefeller in oil and Andrew Carnegie in steel. Both became philanthropists, giving their fortunes to build a modern system of hospitals, universities, libraries, and foundations. A severe national economic crisis broke out in 1893. This crisis, known as the Panic of 1893, affected farmers, workers, and merchants, with prices, wages, and profits falling. 94. Many railroad companies went bankrupt. The political response to the crisis fell to the Democratic Party, and the Democratic president, Grover Cleveland, shouldered much of the blame. Labor unrest included numerous strikes. The most prominent was the violent Pullman strike of 1894, which was put down by federal troops under Cleveland's orders. The People's Party gained strength among cotton and wheat farmers and coal miners, but was later overtaken by the more popular Free Silver movement. The Free Silver movement called for the use of silver to increase the money supply, leading to inflation that, according to its proponents, that would end the Depression. The financial, railroad, and business communities strongly objected that only the gold standard could save the economy. In the most bitterly contested election in the nation's history, conservative Republican William McKinley defeated Free Silver advocate William Jennings Bryan. Bryan won the South and West, but McKinley won big among the middle class, workers, cities, and large farmers in the Midwest. Prosperity returned under President McKinley. The gold standard was adopted and tariffs were raised. By 1900, the United States had the strongest economy on Earth. Apart from two brief economic crises in 1907 and 1920, the overall economy prospered and expanded until 1929. The Republican Party took credit for McKinley's policies.
Thank you for listening, goodbye, and see you in the next part.